You guys asked us a ton of really great cardistry questions, and last time we barely scratched the surface answering those. So today I'm going to pick up where Connor left off. I'm going to keep answering your questions and hopefully break down some of the more common areas cardists struggle and what you can do about it. So let's dive right in. All right, so for the first question here, we've got, what is a good move to start off with? I think that's an excellent question. It's a really important one, especially if you're just getting started with cardistry. And I think the answer is going to be a little bit different for everyone. The reason I say that is because first and foremost, I think you should be learning things that look fun to do, right? You want to see moments and be like, wow, that looks cool. I want to learn that. And I think that's what gets a lot of people into cardistry. So keeping that in mind, there are going to be a lot of different beginner moves you can choose from. You know, you can do things like Charlier cut, which is going to be a nice little way to get familiar with breaking packets and using one hand to complete something. There's other things like aerials and kind of springs and spreads and stuff. Like you could learn how to do a card spring. You could learn how to do a card dribble. There's a lot more motion going on with them. And really they kind of accomplish something totally different. So I think a big part of that is figuring out what looks enjoyable to you within that subset of level 0 to 1 moves. So if you don't know, we have a cardistry level system that we've created where essentially every move gets ranked based on how difficult it is, or at least the moves that we teach. And that gives people an idea of, okay, where am I at in my progress with cardistry and kind of what am I working toward next? So I would say, look at our playlist, go to some of our tutorials in short form and even some of our long form ones and see level 0, level 1 moves and learn those. I think that's going to be a really good starting point. And if I were to pick a couple, I would say 2 that I'd really recommend learning are the Charlier cut and backdrop. And the reason I say those 2 is because you can actually combine them to do this fun little combo here, where you do a Charlier and you drop the backdrop into it. And so just like that, only a couple days into cardistry and you're already doing a combo. So I think that would be a great place to start and then kind of go from there. And like I said, just see what looks fun, what's maybe at or slightly above your current skill set, and give it a shot. Okay, so for the next question, we've got, what type of cardistry do you recommend for beginners? Cuts, flourishes, shuffles, etc. So this kind of goes off the last question in a way, because it's really focused on beginners. What should you be learning when you're somewhat new to cardistry? But more so talking about categories rather than specific moves. And I think that's a really important distinguishing factor, because a lot of times cardists don't realize that when they're getting started with cardistry, there are so many different ways to learn it and so many different things to learn. So for example, if I get really good at the packet cut category of cardistry, I might not be so great at things like fans and spreads and stuff like that. If I learn a bunch of aerials, I might be able to do a bunch of that stuff, but I might not be great at packet cuts. And so I think when you're getting started, it's really important to try out a bunch of those different categories. See not only what are you good at within those categories and which categories suit you as a person, but really which ones are fun to do. And it kind of goes back to that same point I was making earlier of, you want to make sure that you're learning things that look like they're going to be enjoyable. So really, like when it comes to categories, you know, there are certain people who just stay within a couple categories for their entire, cardistry career. For example, Predator Deck. He's an old school cardist, but he really made a ton of advancements in the way that you can fan a deck of playing cards. And there's a lot of just crazy mind-bending stuff that he was able to come up with because he spent so much time focused on just spreads and fans. And so he sort of, didn't spread himself too thin, so to speak, and try to learn all of these different categories and got really good at 1 or 2 of them. So I would say at the beginning, good to dip your toes into different categories, see what you like, see what's fun. And then as you get more experienced, start to tailor it toward a couple categories that you're having the most fun with and really, just work on those. I think the beginning, dipping your toes in, will give you more experience overall with the deck of cards and more versatility with being able to do different types of movements. And that's great. But I think that in terms of creating and really developing as a cardist, if you try to spread yourself too thin between all of those different categories, it's going to be a lot trickier to make a lot of progress. So yeah, just again, have fun with it. Try not to overthink what categories you're working on, but make sure that at least at the beginning you get some good variety in there and you'll have fun with it. Okay, so for the next question, we've got how long does it take before you're considered good? I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's a really difficult one to answer. And I think that the answer has changed substantially over the last 15 years. If you don't know, cardistry is still a somewhat new art form in a lot of ways. And so a lot of the more recent creations and sort of advancements have been made in the last 15 years. So what it took to be good 15 years ago is much different than it was now. And not only is it harder, but it's sort of defined differently. I would say back then, it was you're able to perform some basic moves, maybe a few complex packet cuts, like Sybil and slightly harder at a competent level, right? You can do those moves every time without dropping cards, and you can even sort of mix and match and add other things in there. I would say now, what some people would consider good is a lot different in the sense that it's more based around creativity. Especially as cardistry has advanced, the number of moves that are created monthly, weekly, and even daily has increased substantially as well. So, a lot of the value of being a cardist in this day and age has been in what can you bring to the table in terms of new creations. Yeah, I would say now a lot of cardists will probably consider you to be a good cardist if you've added that value to the community. You've helped expand the overall realm of what's possible with a deck of cards. So I would say that my definition personally falls somewhere in the middle of those two. I would think maybe you've explored a couple ideas, you've had a couple creations, and you've also been able to fluidly, move through cuts and not drop cards along the way. So that's how I would personally define it. But I think that that's really for you to decide as a cardist. I think you get to decide what you're trying to get out of this. You might just be here to shuffle and have a good time. And hey, you could be good in your own mind after a couple weeks. It really just depends on what your timeline is, what you're looking to get out of it. And I would say don't limit yourself by letting other people define how good you are. Just have fun and other people will give you credit where credit is due. Okay, next question here. What should I pay attention to when buying cards? Really important question. Something that a lot of people overlook, especially at the beginning stage. It's really easy to just pick up any deck of cards and think that it's going to, perform just as well as anything else. And while that's kind of true at the beginning, you don't have as much exposure to what the deck should feel like. It's definitely really important to consider. So a lot of people in our comments will post things like, can I use an Uno deck of cards? And I would say probably not. I would definitely avoid using those if I were you. The cards aren't going to have the same poppiness to them that a regular deck is. They're going to kind of be a little flimsy, a little oddly shaped. The corners might be rounded differently. They might be smaller or larger, and they're not going to give you that natural feeling that another deck is when you pick it up. So to sort of get your hands used to what is normal, I'd recommend grabbing a normal deck of cards, which should first and foremost be paper-based. So you want to make sure you're avoiding plastic cards because they're just not going to have the same ability to spread and fan while also staying together nicely for cuts and stuff like that. So really important to make sure it's paper-based. And the other consideration there is make sure that it's not bridge size. You want to get poker size playing cards that look like this in the shape. And really one thing with bridge size cards is they're slightly narrower. So the deck is going to feel a little bit elongated, a little bit tall and narrow. And you could do that if you have really small hands, and it can be beneficial at the beginning, but it's going to be different proportions than a regular deck of cards, which is going to kind of feel weird when you do shift to a normal deck, which I would always recommend doing at some point. So yeah, it's really pretty straightforward though. I'll say, Most companies like Bicycle include most of their decks as poker size and also paper-based, and those are kind of the two main requirements. All of our decks are also meeting those requirements. So if you haven't seen these, they're available at squareupcards.com if you want to check them out. Yeah, overall, really not too many requirements there. Just make sure that it's something you want to look at, right? You want to make sure the design is something you enjoy looking at all the time, because you are going to spend a lot of time looking at your playing cards. So make sure that you have, enough variety, enough different designs and stuff like that to where you're having fun, switching things out and keeping that part of the art dynamic. So, yeah, that's all I'll say for that one. So I'll go ahead and do one more question here. Let's round it out with this one. How many times should I be able to do a move before I move on to another one? Another excellent question. I think this is one that probably is the most overlooked of all of these by any other cardist, and that's mainly because of the performances that I see online. I think a lot of people are good at this, and you do see nice, clean takes of moves on social media. But I think a lot of cardists, given their high skill level, don't always post the best performances of their moves. And I think that this is really just because people like creating so much that they just want to move on to working on the next thing and the next thing. And especially as you're getting excited at the beginning about learning all these different moves, it's easy to want to learn 10 all at the same time. And I think that can cause a lot of issues. I think if people really spent the time to practice one move until they have it completely nailed down and they never drop cards, they can do it every time and do it smoothly without looking or paying attention, I think that is a sign that you are good on that move and you're ready to move on to the next one. I would say I'd recommend only working on 1 or 2 new moves at the same time, maybe 3 if you want to push it. But really, the key is making sure that you've got it down to a level where you're super confident in your abilities, right? You don't want to move on to another move and then feel like you're kind of being stretched thin because you have all these different things you're trying to learn and only 1 or 2 of them you can actually do competently. So I think that's really important. Something that even experienced cardists get wrong a lot is just not spending enough time working on a move, whether it's an original one or a new move that they're learning, before putting it in a video. So yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway. And yeah, I'll kind of leave it there for now. We did get some other questions, so I'm sure we'll answer those in a different video in the future. But in the meantime, definitely let us know below in the comments if there are other questions you guys have. We love answering these, and we've seen some really good questions come through. So definitely keep those up. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.